Hey, greetings everybody. Gleekon here again with another episode of Lore of Warcraft. On our last one, we read something called the Ascension, which basically kind of detailed the end of Arthas' story in terms of Warcraft 3. He fought Illidan. Illidan failed yet again. Illidan retreated back to Outland yet again. Where his story goes from here, I think, is something for another tale, for another epoch of the Warcraft history. Arthas was infused with power from the Lich King, and afraid of losing his power because of all the enemies he has, he agreed to don the crown of the Lich King. And will he lose himself? Well, we know what happens as far as that goes. But he takes on the mantle of being the Lich King himself. The Lich King offers his power because he thinks he can subvert him, and I think that's kind of where the curtains close on this. And in this book that we're looking at right here, Arthas, I think we might get a hint at whether or not he succeeds. But stay a while and listen as we read the story version of this. It's chapter 23 of Arthas, Rise of the Lich King, and we are very close to the end of this novel, I think. Yeah, we've got one chapter left and then a short epilogue. One chapter after this one. Northrend. There was an odd sense of coming home. As the shore came into view, Arthas remembered the first time he had arrived here, his heart full of pain at Jaina and Uther's betrayal, aching at the necessity of what he'd been forced to do at Stratholme. So much had happened that it felt like a lifetime ago. He had come then with vengeance in his heart to kill the demon lord responsible for turning his people into the walking dead. Now he ruled those walking dead and was allies with Kel'Thuzad. Strange, the twists and turns of fate. He did not feel the cold as he had then, nor did the men who had followed him so loyally. Death dulled sensations for such things. Only the human necromancers bundled up against the icy wind that sighed and moaned, and the snow that began to drift lazily downward as they made anchor and debarked. One thing I think is weird when playing Warcraft 3 and doing all this is that when you use your unholy thing to heal your undead, it also heals your necromancers. Arthas moved stiffly from the rowboat onto the shore. He might not feel the cold of this place, but his powers and his physical self were weak. As soon as his feet touched the earth, Arthas felt him, the Lich King. Not in his mind, not speaking to him through Frostmourne, although the runeblade's feeble glow strengthened slightly. No, Arthas sensed him here, his master as he had not before, and there was a prickling sensation of increased threat. He turned back to the rest of those who were following him ashore. Ghouls, specters, shades, abominations, necromancers. "We must make haste," he cried. "Something out there is threatening the Lich King. We must reach Icecrown quickly." "My lord," one of the necromancers cried and pointed. Arthas whirled, drawing Frostmourne. Through the veil of the falling snow, he could see golden red shapes hovering in the air. They drew closer, and his eyes narrowed in surprise and anger as he recognized the creatures and realized who their masters must be. Dragonhawks. He was astonished. He had all but exterminated the High Elves. How could it be that any of them survived sufficiently to regroup, let alone determine where he had gone and confront him here? A slow smile spread across his handsome features, and he felt the sneaking sensation of admiration. The Dragonhawks came closer. He lifted Frostmourne in salute. "I have to admit," he shouted, "I am surprised to see Quel'Darai here. I would have thought the cold too unpleasant for so delicate a people." "Prince Arthas," the voice came from one of the riders, its beast hovering above Arthas. His voice rang clear and bright and strong. "You still do not see Quel'Darai here. We are the Sindarai, the Blood Elves. We have sworn to avenge the ghosts of Quel'Thalas. This dead land will be cleansed. The disgusting things you have created will rest properly at last. and you, butcher, will finally receive your just punishment. He was amused for a moment. Their numbers were not insignificant. Arthas realized that he was most likely looking at the last few of an all but extinct race, and they'd come just for him. Then his smugness faded into irritation. Despite his wearied state, anger filled his voice as he cried, "Northrend belongs to the Scourge, elf, and you will soon join them. You made a terrible mistake by coming here." More dragonhawks appeared, along with rangers on foot. Arrows flew through the sky, seemingly as numerous as snowflakes, peppering the undead as they charged. Most of them, however, did not fall. The sting of arrows, as long as it did not pierce a vital spot, troubled them not at all. Not bothering to even mount invincible, Arthas charged in. Frostmourne hungered, seemed to gather energy and strength, as did Arthas himself, with each of the bright, shining souls it consumed. In the midst of the clamor of battle, he heard a voice that was deep and cold as Northrend itself call out from a hill above them. "Onward for the Scourge! Slay them! In Ner'zhul's name!" Despite all he had seen, despite all he had done, Arthas felt a deep chill sweep over him at the sound of that bone-cold voice. He risked a quick glance upward, and his eyes widened at what he beheld. Nerubians. Of course, this was their homeland. His heart lifted as they poured forth. He could make out their shapes through the snow, the familiar, unsettling, scuttling speed with which the spidery beings descended on their prey. Arthas had to give these so-called Sindarai credit. They fought valiantly, but they were hopelessly outnumbered, and soon Arthas was standing in a sea of red and gold-clad bodies. He raised his hand, and one by one the dead elves twitched and lurched to their feet, staring at him glassy-eyed. "More soldiers for the one we serve," Arthas said. He looked again, and his eyes fell upon the Nerubian's leader. Yeah, I used the wrong voice for that guy. I thought it was Illidan at first. He was larger than those he commanded, towering over them as he moved easily down the snowy landscape toward Arthas. He moved among them like the king he was, with deliberateness and precision. Arthas tried to find something familiar in something so incredibly alien to him. To the human's eyes, Anub'arak looked like a cross between a beetle and the other more spidery appearing Nerubians he commanded. Arthas found that he had taken an unintentional step backward and forced himself to stay where he was as the creature approached. It kept coming until it was right in front of him, then loomed over him, gazing down with multiple eyes, a thing of utter horror. His ally. Arthas found his voice and forced it to be calm. "Thanks for the assistance, mighty one." The creature inclined its head, mandibles clacking gently as it spoke in that deep, sepulchral tone that still made Arthas uneasy. "The Lich King sent me to aid you, Death Knight. I am Anub'arak, ancient king Nazjonerub. Where is the other?" He reared up on his hind legs, looking about. "Other? Kirin Zod." Anub'arak rumbled again in that hissing, sighing, reverberating voice. He lowered himself down and fixed Arthas with his multiple-eyed gaze. "I know him. I greeted him when he first came to serve the Lich King, as I greet you now." Arthas wondered briefly if Kel'Thuzad had felt as unsettled as he upon first encountering this undead insectoid king of an ancient race. Surely he had been, he told himself. Surely anyone would be. "Your people were a welcome addition to our ranks the first time we attacked these elves," he said, glancing again at the fallen Sindarai. He was very glad Anub'arak's people were on his side. "And I welcome your aid again now. We have little time for pleasantries. Since the Lich King sent you, you must be aware that he is in danger. We must reach Icecrown immediately." "It is so," rumbled Anub'arak. He bobbed his fearsome head and shifted, extending two of his forelegs. "I will gather the rest of my people, and we will march together to protect Our lord. The massive creature moved off imperiously, summoning his obedient subjects, who scurried to him eagerly. Arthas suppressed a shudder and nudged one of the bodies of the fallen elves. It had been ripped limb from limb, too badly damaged to be of use. These elves are pathetic. It's no wonder we destroyed their homeland so easily. Pity I wasn't there to stop you. It's been a long time, Arthas. The voice was musical, smooth, cultured, and laced with hatred. Arthas turned, recognizing it, startled and pleased to find its owner here. The twists and turns of fate indeed. Prince Kael'thas, he said, grinning. The elf stood a few yards away, the shimmer of his teleportation spell still fading. Seemingly ageless, he looked exactly the same as Arthas remembered. No, not exactly. The blue eyes gleamed with suppressed anger, not the hot rage he had seen upon the visage the last time they had encountered each other, but a cold, deep-seated fury. He no longer wore the purple and blue robes of the Kirin Tor, but the traditional crimson hues of his people. Arthas Menethil. The elf did not use a title. He obviously meant it as a slight, but it bothered Arthas not at all. He knew well enough what he was, and soon this too pretty princeling would know it also. I would spit at the thought of your name in my mouth, but you aren't even worth that. Ah, Kael, Arthas said, grinning. Even your insults are unnecessarily complicated. Glad to see you haven't changed. As ineffectual as ever. That raises a question. Why weren't you at Quel'Thalas anyway? Content to let other people die for you while you sat snug and secure in your violet citadel? I don't think you'll be doing that anymore. Kael'thas gritted his teeth, his eyes narrowing. That much I will give you. I should have been there. I was instead trying to help the humans fight the scourge that you unleashed on your own people. You may not care for your subjects, but I care for mine. I have lost far, far too much in dealing with humans. I stand only for the elves now, for the Sindarai, the children of the blood. You will pay, Arthas. You will pay dearly for what you have done. You know, I'm almost enjoying this banter. It's been a long time, hasn't it? I haven't seen you since. He let the sentence trail away, watching as a muscle twitched near the elf prince's eye. Yes, Kael'thas remembered stumbling across Jaina and Arthas locked in a deep kiss. The memory briefly unsettled Arthas as well, and the pleasure he took in inflicting the torment upon Kael'thas soured ever so slightly. I must say, though, I'm rather disappointed in these elves you lead. I'd hoped for a better fight. Maybe I killed all the ones with spirit and Quel'Thalas. Kael didn't rise to the bait. What you faced here was merely a scouting force. Don't worry, Arthas. You'll have a good challenge shortly. I assure you that defeating Lord Illidan's army will be far more difficult. The prince's full lips twisted in amusement as Arthas started at the name. Illidan? He's behind this invasion. Damn it. It would have been better if he had killed Tychondrius himself rather than involving the Kaldarai. He'd known Illidan was power-hungry. He just hasn't realized that the Night Elf would evolve into so great a threat. He is. Our forces are vast, Arthas. The silky, rich voice was laced now with delight. The bastard was really enjoying this. Even now they march upon Ice-Crown Glacier. You'll never make it in time to save your precious Lich King. Consider this payment for Quel'Thalas and other insults. Other insults? Arthas grinned. Perhaps you'd like the details of those other insults. Shall I tell you what it was like to hold her in my arms, to taste her, to hear her call out my... The pain was worse than it had ever been before. Arthas crumpled to his knees. His vision went red. Again he saw the Lich King, Ner'zhul, he recalled the new Barak had named him, trapped in the icy prison. Make haste, the Lich King cried. My enemies draw near. Our time is almost spent. Are you well, Death Knight? Arthas blinked and found himself staring up into the face, if it could be called that, of a new Barak. Oh, wrong voice again. A long arachnid leg was extended toward him, offering him assistance. He hesitated, but was too weak to rise unaided. Steeling himself, he gripped it and rose. It was like a stick in his hand, dried and almost mummified to the touch. He let go as soon as he could stand by himself. My powers are weakening, but I'll be all right. He took a steadying breath and glanced around. Where is Kael'thas? Gone. The voice was cold as stone and laced with displeasure. He used his magic to teleport away before we could rend him to pieces. The cowardly mage trick of teleportation again. If only Arthas's necromancers were capable of such, the Lich King would not be in the danger he was in. Arthas recalled the other corpses and knew that such would indeed have been Kael'thas' fate. I hate to say it, he said, but the damned elf was right. He turned to his intimidating ally. Barak, I had another vision. The Lich King is in immediate peril. They're closing in on him. Illidan and Kael'thas will never reach the glacier in time. I failed. Barak did not seem at all perturbed. Overland, perhaps not, agreed the mammoth creature. It is a long and arduous voyage, but there is another route we might take. Death Knight, the ancient shattered kingdom of Azjol lies deep below us. It was where I once ruled for many years. I know its corridors and hidden places well. Though it has fallen on dark times, it could provide us a direct shortcut to the glacier. Arthas looked up. As the raven flew, it was not that long a journey, but across the ice and the mountains that reared up before them. You're certain we can reach the glacier through these tunnels? He asked. Nothing is certain, Death Knight. For a moment it sounded like the Nerubian was smirking. The ruins will be paradise, but it's worth the risk. Fallen on dark times. A curious phrase for an ancient dead spider lord to use. Arthas wondered what that meant. He supposed he was about to find out. Barak and his subjects set a brisk pace, heading due north. Arthas and his scourge followers fell into step, and soon the ocean was left behind. The sun moved quickly across the dim sky, low on the horizon. The long night was coming. As they marched, Arthas sent some of his warriors to gather what tree limbs and sticks they could. They would burn through many a torch passing through this dangerous subterranean kingdom. After several hours of excruciatingly slow progress, the undead could not truly feel the cold, but the wind and snow slowed them. Arthas knew that despite Barak's nearly wry words, one thing actually was certain. He never would have made it in time to save the Lich King and thus himself by heading overland. In the end, it was self-preservation that drove him so hard. The Lich King had found him, had made him into what he now was, had granted him great power. Arthas knew and appreciated it, but his debt to the Lich King was nothing, loyalty. If this great being was slain, there was no doubt that Arthas would be the next to die, and as he had told Uther, he intended to live forever. At last they reached the gates. So covered with ice and snow were they that Arthas did not immediately recognize them as such, but Barak halted, reared up, and spread wide 2 of his 8 legs, indicating what lay ahead of them. Curved stone looking like sickles or insect legs, Arthas thought, jutted upward, their tips bending toward one another to form a sort of symbolic tunnel. Ahead he could make out the gates themselves. A giant spider was etched upon them. Arthas's lip curled in disgust, but then he thought of the statues dotting Stormwind. Was this really so different? The entrance tunnel and the gates led into the heart of what seemed to be an iceberg. For a moment, just a moment, Arthas glanced at the silent, enormous figure of Barak, thought about spiders and flies, and wondered if he was doing the right thing. Behold the entrance to a once powerful and ancient place, Barak said. I was lord here, and my word was obeyed without question. I was mighty and powerful, and I bowed to no one. But things change. I serve the Lich King now, and my place is defending him. Arthas thought briefly of his outrage at the plague, of his burning need for vengeance. Look in his father's eyes as Frostborn drank his soul. Things do change, he said quietly. But there's no time to reminisce. He turned to his strange new ally and smiled coldly. Let us descend. All right, so that's about half of what we just read in Chronicles, and again, I'm gonna break off and play some of the game because I think the game breaks it up, unlike Chronicles, and I think just like this story does. But we saw Arthas plowing forward, getting ready to go have an ultimate showdown. But really, from the literary side, getting ready to become the Lich King. We have another episode in the pipe, 5x5. Thank you all so much for watching and listening, and I'll see you next time on Lore of Warcraft.